The words of the Gospel of Luke, which have been reserved by the church and handed down to us through the centuries for our hearing, our understanding, and our discussion this morning. Jesus rolled up the scroll he had just finished reading, handed it back to the assistant, and sat down. Every eye in the place was on him, intent. Then he started in, "You've just heard Scripture make history. It came true just now in this place." All who were there, watching and listening, were surprised at how well he spoke. But they also said, "Isn't this Joseph's son? One we've known since he was a youngster?" He answered, "I suppose you're going to quote the proverb, 'Doctor, go heal yourself.' Do here in your hometown what we heard you did in Capernaum." Well, let me tell you something. No prophet is ever welcomed in his hometown. Isn't it a fact that there were many widows in Israel at the time of Elijah during that 3.5 years of drought when famine devastated the land, but the only widow to whom Elijah was sent was in Sarepta and Sidon? And there were many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, but the only one cleansed was Naaman the Syrian. That said, everyone in the meeting place seized him with anger. They threw him out, banishing him from the village, then took him to a mountain cliff at the edge of the village and threw him into his doom. But he gave them the slip and was quickly on his way. This is the gospel of Christ.
Praise to Christ, the Lord.
I would say that those are some very strange lessons and some very strange stories. But they're about, at least partly about calling and about what it means to be called and what one is called to. And so, in keeping with what we had started a couple weeks ago, as we get into it, I just want to take a short segue, if you will, or sidebar, because they call it a sidebar now, to have some people just stand up and introduce themselves and say who they are and what they feel they're called to. Well, you can do that just by saying a little bit, one sentence extra about yourself. We started this a couple weeks ago, and people found it was very, very helpful and interesting. And we're getting into our annual meeting today, and we're going to have a chance to have a new directory for everybody. And also, people will be talking or electing people. I think it's really a good thing that we know a little bit more about each other, especially if we're going to have a chance to discuss things. So, Judy, would you stand up? Just turn around and just say your name and a word about yourself. What you do for a living, what you are for a living, what you've been for a living, what you hope to be for a living.
I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Okay. Your name is?
I'm Judy Baker. I have a grandson in California, granddaughter, a daughter-in-law. I was a teacher. I was a student of American folk art. I like to do that kind of work. And I, right now, am sort of retired, but probably need to start looking for some way to make some money. I sell things on eBay. And was married for 30 years. And I'm just starting to look around and see if I can meet some nice man.
Church is always a good place.
Anyway, I could go on and on and on.
That's good. I'm pretty sorry. Chris, would you stand up and tell us about yourself? One sentence or a few more. We're introducing people today. We're just, we're doing 5 every week now. So
Now you're going to trust you.
that's all right. That means that we won't have time to think about it.
Chris Giorgio. How do I define myself? Well, I'm a community activist in many different ways.
Other people, I know who you are.
I've been involved with gay rights for 14 years. I've been involved with the church for, I think, close to 10 now. I think I'm heading that way. And that's basically it, trying to make some changes in my life.
But normally right now you are doing what?
Oh, I'm
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yes. In fact, my new glasses.
I'm Sisco optical now. I moved on from Sisco.
So Costco here, you can come visit. Robin.
Yeah. I'm Robin Anderson. Live in New Rochelle. I'm a media critic. It's kind of aggressive sometimes, but never mind that. I direct a program at Fordham University called Peace and Justice Studies, and I consider myself an educator. And I'm married to him.
Would him stand up and offer a rebuttal?
I'm Guy Robinson. Yes, I'm also an educator, somewhat different field. I teach science in general, but in particular I do research in what we call paleoecology. I do ancient ecosystems right up to the present. So my particular interest is in the extinction of animals, well, and plants. And educating people about the world, what things we might be able to do about it.
Anna.
I'm Anna Giordano. I am German. I came to the States in '93. I'm married. I have a degree in master's in marketing and distribution, but right now I'm raising little futures, they're 3 and 5, and so hopefully eventually I can distribute them into the world. I'm a hobby pilot, and I am, with my husband, restoring old motor scooters. So we have 40 in our basement, and it's the largest collection on the East Coast, and that's how we spend our time.
Thank you. Well, you see, you don't want to miss a beat because you'll miss who somebody is and what they do. I think it's very interesting to see how it is that the people in this parish have such a wide variety of backgrounds and such an incredible bevy of gifts to offer not only to their families and their community, but to us also. And that is, I think, part of what a calling of a community is, the calling within the community, and that is to be able to know and to share. I know most things that people said today, but I didn't know all of them. So even if you've known people for a long time, you always find some things out that are very, very interesting. I wanted to say, as we get into the discussion this morning also, that speaking, there was some stuff here about hands in the first lesson. It's good to have Eric back. As you know, Eric was in a car accident, and he, of all the things that could have happened that were very, very tragic, the only thing that really was serious, very, very serious, is that we know at the moment, is that he broke 2 fingers. But to be here 2 weeks afterwards and the play is just amazing, I think. And so, thank you. I'd say give him a hand, but you've already done that, and he's having trouble with what he has at the moment. So luckily, he told us that the breaks were clean and they were right at the finger where the bone's going to be able to reossify without a lot of trouble. And he looks forward to playing with both hands and all fingers. Right? 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah, 3 or 4 weeks. That's really, really good. That's very, very good news. And you see, God has a sense of humor, though, I think, about all that, because although Eric's not playing, we get to hear him sing, which is a very nice trade-off, I must tell you. There are some days that it'd be just fine if you didn't play and you sang. That would be good. And of course, we have Oscar up there who will play for you anytime you want to sing, and then we can always bring in a ringer or two. And there's some people here in the congregation who play the piano who have not owned up to it as yet, but perhaps when they get up to speed in the future, we'll know about that. So that's a very, very good thing to have you here. I was saying to Anthony as I was preparing for the service for this week, and typed in this gospel lesson. That is one of the strangest exchanges I have ever seen I don't think the people in that day, Luke puts these words into Jesus' mouth, but I don't think the people in that day, if they ever heard it, or even the people who read it long after it had been written, even if Jesus never said it, I don't think they had any idea what this meant. Do you understand why they were angry? It's very weird. I mean, if you went into a meeting and you said, you came home to Chris and said, Chris, everybody at church was angry today, and Chris said to you, why is that? And you said, well, the priest got up and he said, isn't it a fact that there were many widows in Israel at the time of Elijah during that 3.5 years of drought and famine and devastated the land? But the only widow to whom Elijah was sent was in Sarepta and Sidon? Can you believe he said that? What does that mean? And then, if that's not enough, and there were many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elijah, but the only one cleansed was Naaman the Syrian. Oh, that makes it really clear. Very good. What does it mean? This is one of these times when I know that if Anthony had the editing pen, he would have said, let's just cut this part out because it really doesn't help the conversation at all. If you have to tell the whole story, why tell this part of the story? And of course my answer to that is that everybody, at least 70 million other people in the United States and Christendom are reading the story this morning, so they're asking the same question. I'm serious about this, I want you to look, here's a media thing for you, Robin. Look in the media this week and see how many people say something about widows, lepers, Sidon, Naaman, and Syria. All of a sudden, things that, because it's in your head and you don't know why, but you haven't made the connection before, all of a sudden it starts to connect. And it has an impact, especially upon leaders who consider themselves to be religious and mix that up a lot with their daily musings and decision making. So what does it mean? What is this all about? What is it talking about? Yeah.
It means that know you well tend to see you as the boy next door, and they can't envision you as something much more than that.
Well, that's certainly the first part of the whole thing.
All right, but the other one is that he's saying that the prophet, he didn't go to his own area to do something for these widows. He went someplace else entirely.
Well, why would people be angry about this particular reference? First of all, he's assuming, Luke is assuming, in putting these words into Jesus' mouth. And Luke, remember, is a Gentile. He's writing to Gentiles. And he doesn't have a Jewish audience particularly that he's writing to. He's telling them part of the story that they don't know, as if they would understand what this means. We don't have a good Jewish background, generally speaking. We are Gentiles in the way that is described in many ways. And yet we don't understand this either. How could the people of that day, or any day, understand what was going on here? What was it that really made them angry enough to take Jesus down to the cliff and try to push him over it? Yes?
The Messiah was supposed to be a reincarnation or a second coming of Elijah. But Elijah was a great prophet, and if Elijah was not going to the chosen people, but going to a different people, then what does that mean about who the Messiah is going to
But the interesting thing, though, about Elijah and Elisha was that they were both accepted by their people as prophets and treated as such. They were treated well. So he's saying something more difficult here. Now, nobody would know that unless you read the commentaries behind the lesson, which I did. So, I mean, as much as I know about Elisha and Elijah, and even what you said being true, it still doesn't make sense. So now what he's really saying here is what got them partly angry was the fact that he brings up these two stellar examples who were accepted in their own country. What is he doing? He's doing something they don't like, obviously. What? He's equating himself. He's comparing himself to Elijah and Elisha. Now that can get you really angry if you don't carry forth the gifts of Elijah and Elisha into the community. If you stand up and say something about them, calling somebody's name, evoking somebody's spirit, if you will, calling them into your conversation. Who was it? Dan Quayle, I think. Remember that name? Do you remember one time, I guess it was...
You know John Kennedy.
That's correct. Who was it that said that to him? The guy who was...
Lloyd Benson.
Yes, Lloyd Benson. Because he mentioned John Kennedy, which really offended a lot of Democrats and a lot of the people who weren't Democrats. And he said, yes, you need to sit down because you're no John Kennedy. So it's the same sort of thing here. Now that you know that, and that's been unpacked a little bit, as they say, then put that into the first part that you were talking about, Joanne, where they say, wait a minute, isn't this Joseph's son, the guy down the street, the carpenter's kid? You know, not Karen Carpenter, but you know, the carpenter kid. And we know him. How can he be anything else other than we already know? Just like what you all just said about yourselves. Some people might get angry that they didn't know that about you. Or then they get angry to think that you would say that about you when they don't see you in that light. Judy is a very, very talented painter and restorer. She does wonderful work in restoring clocks and old stuff and painting toll trays and all that. I mean, the point where she's one of the best I've ever come across in all my years in doing antiques and everything. But some other people may not think so. And they get upset that I might be saying that about Judy, but haven't pointed out that Irene is that person who plays the piano so well, and we need to hear more about it, you know. Of course, Irene may be upset now that I mentioned about the piano, but, you know, but you can upset everybody very, very easily just by pointing out what it is, or trying to name what it is that you think they're called to, and they may not feel that that is how they want to be known. I think about that in relation to this church. We're called, for so long, the little white church on the hill. And they meant white, literally, not the color of the building. For many years, we were the little white church on the hill. That was changed to Little Church on the Hill, and then it was changed to the church that does the tag sales. I'm really hoping for something greater than that before I leave this world. That maybe we could be known as the church that is a leader in community outreach. A church that does inventive liturgy. Right now we're known as the church that has the weird signs as they drive around. I'm sure people were comforted today. I'm sure George will be much more comforted today by the sign than he was in the last 3 weeks. You may have heard that when we first put swaddling up there, he called Joanne up and said, "What was that? What does that mean? Swaddling." He said, "I almost drove right off the road." If you know George, he said, maybe they spelled it wrong. What does it mean? But I'm glad to report to you how many people have stopped and called, written notes, or emails about the sign in the last 4 weeks. I wanted to have a dialogue with the community. I have engaged them in one, let me tell you. And it's been very, very interesting because people say, well, why did you put it up there? What were you trying to say? And what I was trying to say, although it may not have been clear to them, they didn't identify it as such, is I was trying to say that we are a church that does not preach to people, hopefully, that we are trying to engage people in a dialogue. I've been very concerned about the fact that we have a dialogue sermon every week if we're putting preachy things out on the sign. That's not how I hope that we will be seen by the community as a church that preaches to you. How about a church that wants to engage you in a dialogue? Because after all, I think, and the whole purpose of even having this discussion this morning, the whole purpose of even reading the lessons is to get into some sort of dialogue when people say, I have no idea what it is that you just read. That's not a bad thing. because then it starts a dialogue, rather than.
Maybe then the sign should say something like dialogue spoken here.
Well, actually, this morning it does. What does it say this morning, Fred?
Word of God.
The word of God is spoken.
The Spirit of the living Word of God is spoken here.
That still sounds very kind of preachy.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
But the whole idea is that I believe that, I want to get into a dialogue, so this gives me the opportunity. I believe that the liturgy is a living word. It has to be alive. It has to be the language we speak, or else there's no point in having a conversation. If you go back to St. Paul's letter this morning when he talks about, I'd rather speak 5 words that people understand than 10,000 words of gibberish.
How about is disgusted?
D-I-S-G-U-S-T. Yes, spelling. Well, it can be spelled either way. Is disgust here? Is disgust here? It's the same. It's a homophone and nothing else. It sounds the same.
I had an interesting experience with a conversation with my mother. My mother obviously grew up in the church and is very religious and not overly so. But I was telling her what you were doing and that there's a sermon, a dialogue sermon, and that you bring the Thomas and James Evangelium in there. And she was like, I could see her kind of fall back into her chair and saying, she was really uncomfortable with the whole concept of somebody not preaching, but just putting all this information out there that is not necessarily just in the Bible. And she has a real issue with translating the Bible text into modern speech, because all of that touches her soul as to, this is not what God said, God wrote this Bible this way, and how dare we changing this, and how dare we putting aspects of that is not in the Bible into this concept. So I could see her really clamping up, looking at me like I was completely talking bad about God, and just, she was completely clamping up until I told her that what we do here is talk about what is being said and see how it's done from all these perspectives. And not that there is a person with his personal vision out there who is telling us what we have to think. And that's where I like about this. So you don't tell me what you think. You tell me this is what's being said and you think what you want to think. But I realized, talking to my mother, to my father, to my aunt, to my uncle, who was all very church-going, is that concept is very frightening for people who grow up in the church, who are being told what to think.
Right, and that's why we're not full every Sunday.
Okay.
What church are you talking about?
The Protestant, actually Baptist church.
In Germany.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one of the reasons, as we talked about before, Irene's daughter is from Beverly Hills, and her priest was my mentor in seminary. When she came here, she said, I'm going to come back here next time. There won't be a seat here. What you're doing is really great. And I said to Irene afterwards, and her daughter going back to California, said, of course she doesn't realize that what we do scares many people right to the very edge of their skin. Just like it scared you when I asked you to stand up.
I knew it was coming, though.
Yeah, you know it's coming. But that is very scary.
I was just going to say, when I first started coming, to kind of piggyback on what Anna said, I was speechless, and I'm really not a quiet, shy person, but when I got here, I hadn't been going to the Catholic church where I was raised for decades. And I sat here and thought, you want me to open my mouth? You're not telling me what to think? And I realized as time went by, that's that old stuff. It's still there, that I'm still working to clear out. So I can really relate to what you're saying. I mean, it's
one thing I want you all to know, if you don't already, that the dialogue goes on all week. I get lots of calls, and I get over between 250 and 300 emails a week from people in the congregation. So if you want to know how I spend some of my time, it's in answering those emails. Sometimes they're just really short. I also send emails out, as you notice. Sometimes 4 or 5 a week, trying to keep up with people. And for the people who don't have email, I mail it to them. Whatever email I've written, so that they can keep up with what's going on. I'm trying to be in dialogue, just not on Sunday, but all week. And you'd be surprised what comes up all week, that again, in a media perspective, how it relates to what's going on in people's lives. I can remember one time Chris saying to me, you know, I haven't thought about it, I was having a difficult week at the time, but that thing that we say at the end in the Franciscan prayer, that to be bold enough to think that you really can make a difference in this world. When I got into this one situation, I said to myself, well, now it's, you know, this makes sense, because I can make a difference. I had never thought that I could before, but now that comes to my head, and some of those parts of it are going to run through your lives this week, I hope. That's part of the reason to have this session.
So, bringing the dialogue back to the story, so Jesus gets run out of town.
Right.
Is this story just to show that he had a hard time in the early beginning, or? I mean, what was I guess my point, what is the point of, I still don't understand what the
point of, it's a foreshadowing in Luke. It's very early in Luke. And it's Luke's way of saying, yes, from the beginning he had a hard time, and you can see how Luke builds, he's really, although he's claimed that he was a physician, he's really a systematic theologian or a lawyer in some ways. And then he builds the case very, very slowly to the point that when Jesus finally turns the tables over of the money changers, you know that he's pushed them too far. Everybody. Not just the people in the temple, but everybody in town, he's pushed them just too far.
So this is sort of the beginning
of the foreshadow of what's going to happen.
Pushing the envelope.
He's going to be pushed off the cliff, literally. They're going to kill him. This is the first attempt. And they're going to not let him be a prophet in his own country. They're not going to hear what he has to say. So it's Luke's way of trying to say, because he builds it backwards. You have to remember that Luke is telling the story from looking back. He wasn't an eyewitness to this stuff when Jesus was actually, when it was actually happening to Jesus, if indeed it happened in this way at all. Each gospel writer, and this is one of the things that you can say to your mom as a comfort, or maybe not, is that whether we like it or not, each gospel writer has their own point of view, which some which contradicts other things. So when you try to put it together, if you try to do it, and it was the Germans who first did this, you can comfort her with that also. The Germans were the first ones that laid out the text side by side and said, wait a minute, this doesn't match. Here it says he says this, and over here it says he said that. Here it says that Lazarus was raised in 4 days from the dead, and over here it says, in the Gospel of Luke, it says Lazarus wasn't even that person. And in Mark, Lazarus doesn't appear at all. In Matthew, they don't even know Lazarus. How can this be a central part of the Jesus story when it doesn't all match? And so, then I think the further question, Rob, is, so now that we know that, so what? Right. How does it touch our lives at all? Except for, I'm sure you're going to see this week that there are people who are going to be speaking in the press, especially now that we're in a presidential campaign, who are going to be telling you that they are prophets who cannot be heard in their own country. You wait till you hear that phrase so many times this week, and you'll send me an email, I hope, and say, look, you were right. That's exactly what Who's What said.
You know, just giving me a thought to tie it all together for myself anyway. Like when you're reading about the law like they were in those days, you're reading about it, you're always anticipating it's coming and anticipating it's coming. And while you're doing that, you're not really dealing with the reality of it because it's always something in the future. And it's like when we came here, we're always in the church, Catholic church, wherever we're from, hearing about things that you say, oh, someday I'll understand something. But then when you're in a place, like they were at that moment with Christ, where they could actually see the reality, they didn't want to see it. So it's like when we come here too sometimes, here we are. But then we hear things, whoa, I don't want to hear that. It's an interesting thing. When it's right in your face, sometimes you push it away, and that's the very thing you were waiting for so many years.
Well, as I said before, if you ask people what they really want out of church, or what they really want out of religion, some people in whatever way they say it, they may not phrase it like this way, but they really want to say, you know, I want to be closer to God, I want to be closer to Jesus, I want to be closer to the community, I want to be closer to the world, whatever it is, whatever the language is. But you're right, because what they don't realize is how close they already are, and the journey that they're already on. They don't see the signs, and if they did see the signs, they wouldn't know that. They don't notice them. They don't even know. I'd say none of us really see all the signs that are right in front of us that we need to see. And I think that one of the things I hope we can take from the lesson this morning is also the whole idea is that even if we didn't want Jesus to die, even if we wanted Jesus to be our friend, even if we want Jesus to be X, Y, Z for us, or to put it another way, even if we wanted the universe to be kind to us, or even if we wanted God to hear our prayer, that may be happening all the time, but we are not tuned into it because we don't speak the language. And I'm trying to unpack some of the language so that we can begin to speak it. And that's why I think that's another thing I could say for your mom. I'd love to have a conversation with her about this, if you'll translate it back and forth in German for me. And one of the reasons that, again, you must know, if you didn't hear me say it 2 weeks ago, that I change the language of this every week. I change those lessons. I change some of the words in there. If you go back even to the message, even though it says the message, it should say the message adapted. Because I've gone back in there and changed some of those words. And I do that because it's not what I think part of our understanding of what that word can possibly mean. It has a very different understanding. And I don't want the congregation to go away with that particular part of it. And the thing about that is that people have done that for 5,000 years. They've been tampering with this all the time. So it's not just me.
If you go into another average church, Episcopalian church,
yeah,
do they change the same lesson, or do they just read it and then try to interpret it?
There's always choices because, for instance, even though people hate some of the hymns we sing, you have a chance to choose other hymns. The hymns that we chose for this morning are not the hymns that are being sung at Christ Church Pelham. They're not the ones that are being sung at St. James the Less Scarsdale. I can assure you, they're very different. Part of the reason is that a lot of the feedback I've been getting is, can you please have hymns that only have 3 verses? Hence today, every hymn has 3 verses. I don't think there's many other priests in town doing that. Because, for one thing, it takes away from the theology of the total picture. When I choose a hymn, I'm trying to present a theology that works with the rest of the liturgy. So my new thing, Teresa said, every time I come to the church, you change something just a little bit.
Just a little.
My new thing is that I'm going to start printing the hymns in the bulletin every week. So that way I can change the words of the hymns too. And there are not many people doing that in town, or in the Episcopal Church period. But there are some that are doing it. There are some people who are doing it, and this is what's happening in seminary now. This is what people are being taught to do in seminary. This is the new thing coming out of seminary. If we had a seminary assistant coming out of a place like General Theological Seminary, or God forbid Union, where I went to school, they would have heart failure at the language we use because it is so outdated. This is not what's being taught in seminary. As updated as we are miles outdated as compared to what is now being taught in seminary. And you have to bring along a little. And you have to change the words and things a little bit at a time. You just can't do it all at once. People have to get used to it, but also there has to be a logical reason, I think, to do it. And I tried to present that 2 weeks ago, and even in our Bible class, about language that hurts and language that heals. There was language, if you want, take this home with you, look up the message on the internet, and see what I changed, you can see why I changed some of the language. Some of the language I thought was hurtful, not helpful. And something else, it could be said just in a different way with a little bit more nuance and still have the same point. Now when I brought this up that I was doing some of this during my doctoral work, some of the professors there were able, the people who were on my committee will tell you that they were horrified that I thought that I had enough language background and theological background to change the words. And so I challenged them back and I said, well, what makes you think you have enough to comment on that?
Oh, that's good.
Which is why, when we went down for me to do my defense, those of you who were there, you remember what the professor said? I'm really concerned that your church is no longer a Christian church. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. What would it be? What would you like it to be? It's a red hat church. How about that? I would say that a lot of what we're doing is more in line with what's happening in the Unitarian, Universalist way of thinking. But there are some really, we're pretty progressive, but there are some really, really progressive Episcopal churches out there. Just doing stuff that would turn your hair a different color. And you say, okay, I can go this far, but I can't go that far. You know, naked dancing around the sanctuary. Just about. I mean, that's how it's been described. In fact, when I had Ray go to that one website as part of my doctoral work.
Where is this again?
Where's this? I think like this.
I heard about Larchmont. Is it Larchmont?
Where else but San Francisco? Oh, yeah, of course. I had Ray go to the one website to look at it, to comment on it, and Irene and some other people did. And I remember Ray writing back to me, this has been 4 years now, and said, God save me from that church. Please, don't do any of that, you know, let's not get into that. But they had 3,000 people coming to service. So then, and this goes into our annual meeting for today, this is where I'm going to end it for now. Then it brings up the whole question. What type of church do we want to be? Do we want to be a church that's full every Sunday? Do we? If we really do, if it's a numbers thing, then we need to switch gears. If it's a community thing where we're not concerned about numbers, then everybody needs to give a lot more money. If we want to do the things that we say that we're going to do. Or do we want to be who we are? This is pretty good for right now. Let's just let this settle for a little while. I noticed that you moved the pews down. Did you notice here? There's a lot of room up here. Did you notice that? It's been several weeks now.
I did.
And we did it out of a discussion that we need more room in order to turn around, you know, to make the communion flow a little bit better. And since we put the piano here from where we originally had it, you know, there's lots of things that we've been doing. You'll notice there's no prayer books in the pews anymore. Haven't noticed that? You found one? No? No, that's a Bible. Wow. They were ending up on the floor. People were not using them at the moment. So I spent every Sunday for the last couple of months picking them up off the floor. Because that's the first thing people do. They put the handle and the prayer book on the floor because we're not using it. So since the hymnals were ending up on the floor also, and they're expensive, $30 for each one, I decided, well, I could just cut and paste the hymns. You know, another little bit more time, but why not? So, you know, these are all things that are happening. But if we're going to do it, I want you to think, as we get to the annual meeting, what type of vision you have. Where are we going to go for the next year? I have some ideas, but it'd be really interesting to hear, although I have heard from a lot of you already about where you think I should go. But I have some ideas about where I think we can go together. And I think that I want you to think about it. Because you're invested in it. You invest your time, you invest your money, you invest yourself here, and we're going to ask you to do more of all that, you know, in the year ahead. So as we begin this is our 149th year. We are coming up to 2008, which October 20th in 2008 is our actual 150th anniversary. The church was built in 1859, and the congregation was started in 1858. So this is a year to think about it. I just sent out an email asking everybody what they think we should put in the time capsule. I have not heard from one person. Nothing official in writing.
I suggested people.
You did, yes. Certain people you said, yes. But I couldn't get them to agree to it.
How big is it?
This big. So if you have room for 10 items in a capsule that's about this big to be buried so that they dig it up 100 years from now to see who we are, what do you want to put in there? What do you think represents who we are? I think that's a really interesting challenge. We have to know by October.
Definitely for our house. Not necessarily the boss.
Write me an email.
The photographs of the ground.
Yes. Write me an email. I like to know what you think. And then I like to feed it all back to you, see. Because I think that how we want to be remembered is a very, very good indicator of who we think we are. I ask couples when they're going to get married now. Just a way of opening a dialogue, which is always fascinating. I say, if you were a fly on the wall at your own funeral, what would you want people to say about you? So it's usually the groom who steps in, well, I'll be brave on this one. So he starts saying, I would like to say that I was thoughtful and kind, and the bride is going, what? And that I was always there for people. You weren't even there for me today. You were supposed to pick me up at 3. And he says, okay, so what do you think? She says, well, I want people to think that, I was always very courteous, and I was a family oriented. What? You wouldn't have a good conversation going. Ask people how it is they want to be remembered, or how they think that people will remember them when they go. So that's the sort of thing that I want us to think about. How it is that we want to be remembered. Because I think that will be a good key as to how it is that we will be known in just a very short few years ahead.